Did you know there is one mistake that destroys brand new fuel injectors before they hit 20,000 miles? 99% of drivers making it right now have no idea. You won't hear it, you won't see it, but you will feel it. That moment your engine violently shakes at a red light, power vanishes mid-merge, and the check engine light starts flashing. It makes your stomach turn, especially when you realize you are staring down a massive repair bill. But here is the worst part. The brand new fuel injectors you just replaced are already dying, not from bad fuel. Not from a cheap filter, but from a mistake so invisible that even experienced mechanics miss it constantly. That mistake is number one on our list today. If you don't test for it, you will replace the same injector 3 times and never fix the problem. But to understand why, we need to look at the 9 other mistakes quietly setting the stage right now. We are counting down from 10 to 1, focusing on the real mechanical, chemical, and electrical failures technicians find when they put these parts under a microscope. Now, most people think an injector just squirts gas. It is actually a precision valve firing thousands of times a minute, atomizing fuel into an ultra-fine mist. Gasoline engines use electromagnetic solenoids, while modern diesels use piezoelectric or high-current actuators under extreme pressures. When that mist is off even slightly, you get misfires, wasted fuel, and damage spreading to your catalytic converter, oxygen sensors, and pistons. Injectors depend entirely on a fuel pump for pressure, a filter for protection, a regulator for stability, and the ECU controlling the pulse width. If a failing EGR or PCV valve changes your intake composition, it accelerates deposit formation on the tips. If any piece of that ecosystem fails, the injectors take the hit. That is exactly why problems rarely start at the injector itself. They start upstream. So here are the 10 that do the most damage, starting with the one everyone ignores. Mistake number 10, skipping your fuel filter replacements and forgetting to drain water separators. Your fuel filter is the absolute cheapest defense between the garbage in your gas tank and the precision components keeping your engine alive. When you skip that change, abrasive particles literally grind down the sealing surfaces, while varnish coats the moving parts and debris blocks the nozzle openings. One skipped filter perfectly sets the stage for rough running, terrible fuel economy, and a repair bill that dwarfs the cost of a new filter. How often? For gasoline engines, every 15 to 30,000 miles, sooner in dusty conditions. For diesels under heavy use, 12 to 15,000. And honestly, if symptoms point to the fuel system, just replace the filter first. It's cheap, fast, and sometimes solves the entire problem right then and there. Now, diesel owners really need to hear this. Your injectors and high-pressure pumps run on extremely tight tolerances, relying entirely on clean fuel for lubrication. Water creates rust, acid, microbial growth, and corrosion that inevitably leads to complete seizure. Technicians heavily criticize factory filters because their micron ratings are just way too coarse for modern common rail systems. You want to upgrade to a 2-micron filter or better, which is exactly why aftermarket systems like FAS get mentioned so frequently. But the absolute simplest thing you can do, just drain your water separator regularly. It takes minutes, costs nothing, and your injectors completely depend on it. A bad filter is one thing, but your own engine oil can destroy injectors too, and most people have no idea they are connected. Mistake number 9 is neglecting your oil quality and change intervals. When oil breaks down from heat and moisture, it starts forming a thick sludge that migrates everywhere. In diesel engines, where the fuel cools and lubricates internal injector parts, that degraded oil ends up fouling the spool valves, producing extreme stiction and completely wrecking atomization. Often, simply switching to the correct synthetic oil and tightening change intervals resolves stiction issues that mechanics misdiagnose as mechanical failures. But short trips make this situation dramatically worse. If you are only driving 5 or 10 minutes, your engine never reaches proper operating temperature. That incomplete combustion produces varnish, sludge, and carbon that builds up directly on the injector tips. Condensation builds in the crankcase, and fuel starts diluting the oil. Before you know it, your oil is contaminated, thinned out, and unable to protect anything. For diesels, this is a massive red flag. If your oil level is actually rising or smells heavily of diesel, fuel is leaking past the injectors straight into the crankcase. That fuel dilution destroys your lubrication, speeds up bearing wear, and leads to catastrophic engine failure. If you see this, change the oil and filter immediately, then get those injectors diagnosed. Also keep in mind that ultra-low sulfur diesel has far lower lubricity than older formulations. So modern systems depend heavily on additives to protect high-pressure components. The solution? Change your oil on a strict schedule with the correct synthetic. If you mostly do short trips, don't go past 3 to 5,000 miles. And for diesels, consistently monitor your oil level and check for that telltale fuel smell. Oil is one side of the equation, but the fuel itself is an entirely different problem. Mistake number 8 is fuel, quality neglect, and poor storage. When was the last time you thought about the physical condition of the fuel sitting inside your tank? Not the brand or the octane rating. The actual liquid itself. Dirty, old, water-contaminated, or degraded fuel will quickly clog tiny injector passages, score the valve seats, and quietly stack up damage that reveals itself as hesitation, hard starting, and plummeting fuel economy. The contaminants aren't exotic. We are talking about rust from aging underground tanks, sand from refueling, corrosion flakes from degraded fuel lines, and varnish from oxidized fuel. In diesels, you can even get thick biological sludge from organisms thriving in water-contaminated tanks. And here is something a lot of people don't realize. Gasoline goes bad much faster than you think. Under normal conditions, you get about 3 to 6 months before it starts breaking down. Once that happens, lighter components evaporate, heavier components burn dirty, and oxidation forms gums and varnishes that coat the internals of your injectors. If you are running fuel with ethanol, it actively absorbs moisture from the air. Get enough water in there, and you experience an alcohol-water layer at the bottom of the tank that promotes massive corrosion. Stabilizers can slow this if added to fresh fuel, but they cannot restore fuel that has already degraded. If the gas is a few months old, top it off with fresh fuel and drive it out. Sitting for a year or more, drain that tank entirely. Station maintenance actually matters more than the logo on the sign. High-traffic stations constantly cycle their supply, giving you much fresher fuel. It's also worth finding top-tier gas when possible, simply because it contains much better detergent packages. And remember, octane is purely about knock resistance. Keeping your engine clean comes from those detergent additives. Everything we have talked about so far builds up slowly over weeks and months, but mistake number 7 destroys everything in a matter of minutes. Mistake number 7 is accidental fuel cross-contamination in diesel tanks. Putting gasoline into a diesel tank happens way more often than people like to admit. You get distracted at a busy station, or maybe you borrowed a friend's truck, but the consequences are absolutely catastrophic. Diesel common rail systems rely entirely on the fuel itself for lubrication and cooling. Gasoline completely strips that lubrication away. When that happens, you get near instant scoring and seizure of the spool valves, plunger assemblies, and high-pressure pump components. Your injectors, pumps, and pistons can be completely destroyed within minutes. There are documented cases where people install genuine, brand new injectors only to have them repeatedly stick open right after installation, ultimately traced back to the system not being properly flushed after a contamination event. Some of those incidents caused massive, direct damage to the pistons. If you realize you have put gas in your diesel, do not start the engine. Do not even turn the key to accessory mode. You need to drain the tank, completely flush the entire system, and change the oil and filters before starting it up. Running a diesel engine on gasoline takes a simple, drainable mistake and instantly turns it into a 5-figure repair bill. That is the dramatic version of a fuel mistake. But there is a quieter one that is even more common, involving things people deliberately pour into their tanks. Mistake number 6 is using incompatible additives and home remedies. You have probably heard someone swear that automatic transmission fluid will clean your injectors, or told you to dump in a massive bottle of aggressive solvent. You tried it, and now your injectors are running even worse. Legitimate cleaners do exist. Products like Seafoam, Chevron Techron, BG44K, Lucas, Stanidine, Performance Formula, and Diesel Clean can effectively dissolve varnish and lighten moderate carbon buildup. But there are real limits. For port-injected engines, you need a split application between the fuel tank and the intake vacuum line to effectively clean both the injectors and the valves. And if you have direct injection, tank cleaners will help your injectors, but do absolutely nothing for the carbon on your intake valves, because the fuel never touches them. Fixing that requires a physical process like walnut shell blasting. More importantly, no chemical cleaner can fix a physically broken internal component or severe erosion. But overusing additives with high alcohol content or aggressive solvents will permanently damage your seals, pumps, and spark plugs. And that ATF myth? Modern automatic transmission fluid is loaded with friction modifiers that will ruin your seals and destroy your injectors. It has been consistently debunked by professionals, so just don't do it. When an injector clogs, it is rarely just a simple blockage. Usually, the spray geometry shifts, the droplet size changes, and the movement of the internal pintle gets incredibly sluggish. These subtle changes create an uneven combustion that goes undetected much longer than a total blockage would. This is where professional ultrasonic cleaning becomes both a fix and a diagnostic tool. If cleaning restores the flow, you know the issue was simply contamination. Still failing? You are looking at permanent structural damage. Everything so far has been about what goes into your system. Mistake number 5 is about what happens when there is almost nothing in there at all. Mistake number 5 is habitually running the fuel tank near empty. Constantly driving around on low fuel damages your fuel pump and your injectors at the exact same time. Your fuel pump sits inside the tank, surrounded by fuel specifically designed to keep it cool and lubricated. While some vehicles have sump baskets, many designs leave that pump completely exposed as the fuel level drops. When that happens, the pump loses its cooling. It runs hotter, friction increases, and that repeated heat stress literally grinds it down from the inside out. That is exactly why the quarter tank rule is so important. Keeping your tank above a quarter keeps the pump fully submerged and dramatically lowers the chance of pulling contaminants from the very bottom of the tank. All that rust, dirt, water, and microbial sludge naturally settles at the bottom. When you run near empty, you pull straight from the contamination itself. Your filters get overwhelmed, abrasive particles reach the injectors, and water causes internal corrosion that makes the injectors stick or fail entirely. The absolute worst-case scenario is running the tank completely dry. The pump loses all cooling and lubrication in an instant. It overheats, burns out, and trying to restart the engine just stresses the pump motor even further. You also introduce air into the fuel lines, which requires bleeding or priming that might need professional shop tools to resolve. Keep it above a quarter of a tank. Mistake number 4 comes down to terrible replacement practices. You have your failed injectors diagnosed, you replace them, and a few weeks later, you have the exact same symptoms and codes. You are basically paying to fix the exact same problem twice, and this almost always comes down to 3 specific errors. First, using low-quality or counterfeit injectors. Independent testing consistently shows that cheap aftermarket injectors fail baseline benchmarks right out of the box. You will find corroded internals being reused, flow testing skipped, and terrible machining. The second error is replacing only one single injector. Injectors are designed to work as perfectly matched sets. Putting one brand new injector alongside worn ones creates a massive imbalance which leads to uneven combustion and accelerated wear on all the others. This is why diesel technicians insist on replacing the full set every time. On some vehicles, like late 1990s GM trucks with unique spider assemblies, replacing the entire integrated unit is completely mandatory. The third error is installing clean new parts into a contaminated system. If you leave degraded fuel, sediment in the rail, or an old clogged filter, those brand new injectors will foul almost immediately. You must drain out the bad fuel, replace the filter, thoroughly flush the rails, lube the O-rings, and secure every electrical connection before priming the system. Mistake number 3 is driving patterns that quietly destroy your engine. The absolute biggest offender here is short trips. We are talking about those 5 or 10-minute runs where your engine never actually reaches proper operating temperature. Because the engine runs richer when it's cold, it dumps more fuel than can burn cleanly. That incomplete combustion produces a ton of varnish, sludge, and carbon that coats your injector tips and intake passages. Condensation builds up inside the engine, and excess fuel washes protective oil straight off the cylinder walls while diluting the crankcase. Multiple cold starts every single day literally stacks the damage without ever giving the engine a chance to get hot enough to clean itself out. Idling does the exact same thing. The temperatures stay way too low to burn off deposits, so carbon just keeps piling up. Interestingly enough, occasional spirited driving actually helps, because it generates the intense heat required to burn off light buildup. The absolute sweet spot is a 30 to 60-minute highway drive that brings oil and exhaust up to full operating temperatures. It evaporates condensation, burns off deposits, and on diesels, triggers the DPF regeneration cycle. DPFs need sustained high exhaust temperatures to burn off soot. Short trips completely prevent that, causing soot to build up and trigger a hard limp mode. Match your maintenance to your driving style. Short trip drivers need to change their oil every 3,000 to 5,000 miles using high-quality synthetic. Every bad habit on this list doesn't just add up, they multiply. Everything up until now has been about prevention. But what happens when the damage has already started and you just keep right on driving? Mistake number 2 is ignoring the early warning symptoms. Your engine is constantly trying to talk to you. A rough idle, shaking at a red light, hesitation when accelerating, sputtering under load, stalling out, dropping fuel economy, or an erratic tachometer. These are clear signals that your injectors are not delivering fuel properly. Then you have the sensory clues. Smelling fuel near the engine likely means leaking seals or a cracked injector body. Black smoke usually means an injector is stuck open and is dumping too much fuel. White or gray smoke points to unburned fuel passing straight through the combustion chamber. Blue smoke means you are burning oil, or fuel is washing oil right off your cylinder walls. On diesels, a fuel smell in the oil or a rising oil level is a massive warning sign. The check engine light is usually the first formal alert. A steady light means a stored code, but a flashing light means an active, severe misfire that is destroying your catalytic converter. But you cannot just rely on the light, because the OBD2 system requires repeated patterns before it triggers. Intermittent misfires easily fly under the radar, and your engine can be actively failing while the dash looks clear. This matters even more on engines with known vulnerabilities. Take the VWTSI, particularly the 2.0-liter EA888 engine. When injectors fail there, the onset is incredibly rapid. It produces violent shaking and thick white smoke. Or look at the Ford EcoBoost, which constantly produces recurring lean codes like P2177 from a combination of intake carbon and slight injector imbalance. These model-specific patterns prove exactly why swapping parts without doing the proper diagnostics leads absolutely nowhere. And here is where ignoring symptoms systems turns truly expensive. A failed fuel injector starves the cylinder. It removes the vital cooling effect of the fuel. Temperatures spike wildly, which leads to burned valves and warped pistons. A stuck-open injector floods the cylinder and washes away lubrication. In the absolute worst-case scenario, liquid fuel fills the space above the piston. Because a piston cannot compress a liquid, the connecting rod will literally bend or snap in half. That is hydrolock, and your engine is completely done. Unburned fuel will also overheat your converters, foul your oxygen sensors, and feed wrong data back to the ECU. What should have been a $200 fix becomes thousands. Every mistake so far has been a bad habit, terrible fuel, cheap parts, or an ignored symptom. But mistake number one is completely different. This is the hidden killer, and the exact reason why brand new injectors die mere weeks after installation. Mistake number one is electrical system neglect and undiagnosed circuit faults. This breaks hearts because it is completely invisible, mimics other mechanical problems perfectly, and is the single most common reason brand new injectors fail after installation. Every time your engine fires, the ECU sends a precisely timed electrical pulse through a complex network of harnesses, connectors, and ground straps into the injector's solenoid. That timing and voltage determine exactly how long the injector opens and how much fuel it delivers. If anything in that electrical pathway degrades even slightly, the injector simply cannot do its job, and the engine fails in ways that look utterly identical to a clogged injector. Degraded ground wires, corroded connectors, failing alternators, or weak batteries all create voltage drops that completely disrupt that timing. Fuel delivery becomes wildly erratic, so naturally, people replace the injector. But that brand new injector goes right back into the exact same terrible electrical environment, and it fails in the exact same way. But it gets worse. Chronic low voltage actually overheats the solenoid coil inside the injector, damages the winding, and causes premature coil failure. We see this documented constantly. The Ford Sierra XR4 Ti was notorious for repeated injector malfunctions diagnosed as clogs. It wasn't until someone finally checked the ground wires that the real cause surfaced. Deteriorated grounds were causing system-wide voltage drops. Or take the Toyota T100 with the 3.4-liter V6. Owners would spend months chasing multiple cylinder misfires, repeatedly replace injectors, and swap ignition coils. It was only resolved when they finally checked the wiring, grounds, and compression. The injectors were never the issue. And then there is the classic story of the Toyota pickup with a recurring single injector failure. The root cause? A frayed harness wire feeding that specific injector that created just enough resistance to alter the response time. Before you condemn an injector mechanically, do voltage drop testing on both the supply and ground circuits. Check coil resistance, inspect connectors for corrosion, and check the harness for chafing near extreme heat. If you replace the fuel filter, clean the injectors, verified the pressure, and the symptoms are still there, your next step is not another set of injectors. Your next step is the wiring. Now that you know all 10 mistakes, you need the diagnostic approach that ties it all together. You always start with the scanner to check for cylinder-specific misfires, which range from P0301 to P0304, random misfires codes like P0300, or lean codes like P0171 and P0174. But remember, codes can be intermittent, which is why you need hands-on testing. Use a stethoscope to listen for the precise clicks of the injector firing. Use Noid lights to visually verify ECU pulses. Check coil resistance, and do swap tests by moving components between cylinders. When in-car testing finally points to a specific injector, you pull it out for professional bench testing on specialized equipment like an ASNU machine. That gives you objective flow rates, spray geometry, and electrical data under fully simulated conditions. If post-cleaning flow is restored, that injector goes right back into the engine. Clean fuel, stable electricity, correct pressure, and the habits you bring to the driver's seat. No single mistake usually kills an injector all on its own. It is always the combination. But now you understand the full picture. You know why your fuel pump hates an empty tank, why cheap replacement parts create repeat failures, and why the #1 killer hiding behind all of this is a wire thinner than a pencil lead. But here's the thing. We talked a lot today about how bad injectors cause engine misfires. But what if your injectors are perfectly fine and your engine is still shaking? There is another part that silently causes most engine misfires, and 99% of drivers only find out about it when it's too late. Click the video on your screen right now to see exactly what that part is and why you might be replacing the wrong parts trying to fix it. I'll see you over there.